Okay. Yeah. So hello and welcome to the first episode of Inspiring Stories. I have these two amazing authors by my side who have written this amazing book called Myth of the Entrepreneur. If you want to buy this book, the link is in the description. Search for truevalue.com. And I happen to read this book. I'm really inspired by the story, and I want to bring the story to you guys. Who better to speak about the book than the poet and the co-author of the book, Cathy?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Santosh, for having us, and really looking forward to sharing some of the things that went into the writing of this book. So, when we first started writing this book, one thing that we wanted to highlight was Ravi, right? So Ravi has been an entrepreneur for over 30 years in India, built multiple scaled businesses. And one of the fundamental questions that he always had as an entrepreneur was, what does it mean to create value for society? What does it mean to create value as an entrepreneur, as a human being, as a family member, etc.? And I think that throughout Ravi's entrepreneurial career, one thing that's very striking is that he made the radical decision to essentially have the beneficial owner of all these enterprises be a charitable trust. So you can think of it as setting up companies where the DNA and the profits are not going to the traditional people that we think about, whether that's shareholders, institutional investors, the founders themselves, but it's really going to this channel of distributing those profits to people who need it the most, people who need education, basic welfare, which we have a lot of in India in particular, and in many geographies across the world. So, I myself come from a background of studying philosophy. I was a writer, and I was honestly pretty radical. Ravi is radical for the business circles that he travels in, but I think one thing he was shocked by when he met me was someone who pushed him to be even more radical, and was always like, is that radical enough? Can that be more radical? And I think we've made a great team because we were really looking at this problem as, someone who had practiced a lot of this search for true value in his life, and someone like myself where I'm just starting out in life and I'm going on that journey, from a completely different direction. So it was an absolute amazing thing that we were brought together, given our early conversations where most of the time we were arguing, debating in friendly ways, but debating, I felt it was once I heard the entirety of Ravi's story, I was the one who pitched him, we should really make this known to other people because this could be inspiring. The themes in the book, whether it's the importance of reflection, the importance of going back to first principles about value and about our place in the world, going back to really thinking about how we can contribute to society. These are things that everyone in any walk of life has to go through. Ravi has a very particular story, but I think that it's something that can really speak to a lot of people.
Yeah, and it did speak deeply to me because when I read it, I was so inspired because my life and the journey that I followed about following that what I really like, the passions, and I saw that this is a person who has been doing that for 30 years.
Yeah.
And let me tell you all one thing, like Ravi is extremely shy. So to get him in front of the camera, took a lot of effort from Cathy.
That's true.
So before we jump into the story from Ravi, if you have any questions to ask to either Ravi or Cathy, feel free to comment below and I will make sure that I'll cover them. And if you want to ask something directly about the book, feel free to ask me through my link. I'll link the question over here. So Ravi, I want to get to you. I read the book and I was really fascinated by your story from Mumbai, because that I think I connected deeply because I'm from Pune. I was born and raised in Pune, and I could see a lot of things that you were talking about, a Hyderabadi person being in Bombay and trying to create something of value. And the space at which you created was inspiring. What made you take that break?
Well, thank you, Santosh, and thank you, Cathy. My life sounds more fun hearing it from you guys. But about Mumbai was one of my most favorite phases in life. I just left Hyderabad, and it was a non-traditional way of living. I come from a business family, and my father had some very successful businesses. I was a traditional only son, but still my father had this view that if he really wanted me to have freedom, the freedom should be not to choose what to do in his business, but to just choose something about my life. And I left home trying to build something in Bombay. In 1994, the new Indian Telecommunications Act came in, and that allowed for private participation in a sector that was almost close to it for a very, very long time. So it was, and I also had an interest in telecommunications, so it was something that I was keen. But unfortunately, almost all ventures in telecommunications needed large capital, or you needed a license from the government, or you needed some knowledge, something that was so differentiated that would allow you an entry. So we chose to actually enter into the payphone business in Mumbai. And because we recognized at that time, I mean, today cell phones are ubiquitous, but if you look back in 98 or 97, India had less than 4% penetration of phones of all kinds, including cell phones, which meant that 96% of the people relied either on shared phones or largely public phones. And the STD, ISD booths that we have around the country. We thought that how can we create an upgraded experience with that? Traditionally, products at the time that were being built, that were being brought to developing countries, where they would take a product that was in a developed economy and take out some features, take out the frills and say, here is a product that is lower cost, but it doesn't have any of the frills. So we said, how can you create a product that actually is best in class in the world, still competes at the same price range as you are competing with in India? At that time, the STD booth or STD box costed about 12,000 rupees or so. But a fancy phone that we were looking at was $3,000. There was no way we could compete. So we had to create a product that was competitive and still differentiated. And of course, we tried to do that, but I think some of the more fun aspects of that was how did we create this relationship? I mean, Hughes got the license to build a telecommunications network to compete with the government in Maharashtra and Mumbai. So I remember this phase where the whole Hughes team came in from Washington, D.C., and they were staying in the Oberoi Hotel in Mumbai. And I would sit in the lobby there. And I knew that they would go in a horde in the morning about 8:30 or so for breakfast. And they would all sit around, talk and chat. And then they would come back in the evening again about 8:30 and hang out at the bar. So at these two times, I would position myself strategically in the lobby with my laptop and say, hey, hi, how are you? And after you see them a few times, we became very friendly. And then we presented a case to them saying that, look, you're setting up, almost everybody came in thinking, all the foreign telecommunications operators, they came in with their mindset that the best growth will be in corporate segment or will be in the enterprise segment. I was pitching saying, no, go to the worst, I mean, the payphone business. And nobody wanted to touch the payphone business because you deal with street vendors and you're competing with a very socially conscious side of the government. So how did we combine those things? So anyway, it was to the start of trying to design a business based on what the need is in the market, and need is in the market for a much broader range of customers for that. And how do you create something that is telecom, but because we didn't want to get into the political side or a license side or a huge capital side, how can we get in tangentially, saying that we are in the telecommunications business, most of our revenues come from there, but how do you build something profitable outside that? So we built a franchising model, we built the first digital advertising model. In fact, we had the patent for advertising on a screen that sometimes you will see them in elevators these days or here and there. So anyway, so that was an anecdote I can remember from the early days.
One of the things that I found really interesting, I think there's a lot of writing nowadays and a lot of media about entrepreneurship and about entrepreneurs more generally, but I came from a family of professionals. I studied philosophy, I was an activist, so there was very little overlap with entrepreneurs in general, right? And Ravi was probably the first entrepreneur that I had ever met. But one of the things I really felt like we connected about is he really looks at entrepreneurship as an artistic process, right? It's about seeing opportunity. It's about going into that opportunity and trying to make something work again and again. It's about failing. It's about striving for something that's not only profitable or works, but something that's beautiful, something that's unique. And that's something that I saw throughout all of his ventures and that I really admire. So something I always talk about is when we went and did research for this book, we went and visited a lot of the places. Because I told Ravi, I was like, look, I've never been to India, and I really want to, if I'm going to write about these things, I need to see them up front and close. I want to feel what the Oberoi is like. I want to walk in those hallways. So we went and visited the Oberoi, and once we stepped outside, the front guard there immediately said, "Ravi ji, you're back," and gave you a huge bear hug. And one thing I learned that day about Ravi is that he not only used the Oberoi as a place to start this telecom business and was very, smart and hustling about those opportunities, but he even found a tangential way to make it his home. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of the book, by the way.
I don't know how that got into the book, but I mean, moving to Bombay from Hyderabad, I think one of the biggest issues, even today for Bombay, is where do you live? And because all our businesses were based in central Mumbai, in fact, South Mumbai, and all the people we're dealing with were based in Nariman Point, our offices were close by there, the people we were dealing with. So it was important for me to stay closer to South Mumbai. And I found that it's impossible to find any place to live in that's even reasonably priced. I mean, I had a budget of close to zero. So we had to figure out how to do it creatively. I went to all these apartment buildings. You had to pay a 12-month deposit for 12-month rental deposit. And the rent itself for like a 2-bedroom place was something like 5-7 lakh rupees a month. That was a lot of money. That was more money than we were investing in the company itself at the time. So I did manage to convince the Oberoi management to give me like an 8 or 10 room suite, and they knocked it together and made a little apartment for me. They found a designer and architect to put it together to my taste, minimal way, whatnot. And I like long views, so I wanted a view of Marine Drive, I wanted a view of the sea. So it was fun. So I did stay there for a very, very long time.
Yeah, so when we went, it was like, Ravi had been living there in Mumbai for 5 years, and everyone in the staff knew him. Everyone was asking about his children, if they had grown up, and it was really heartwarming to see, such a close establishment, and also someone who looks at life and, not just in the business related things, obviously, but even in the life things, trying to find these creative solutions. I remember Ravi telling me how, the reason why he realized that the Oberoi would be a good place is because he was there every day and he saw that a lot of the newspapers outside of the doors weren't being picked up. That meant that occupancy is really low, so he had some room to negotiate there. And later on, he was telling me how in the rental contract he put in all these little things like fresh flowers every day and those coordinated flowers for all the rooms.
The same color of roses in every room every day.
Yeah.
And they would switch, and then 2 large vases of whatever. So
yeah, and you requested that you wanted
I wanted rabdi. I loved their rabdi. So I said, I need a contract that any time rabdi should be available for me the way I like it. And they put it in the contract too. I wanted like a dozen newspapers. They were so nice.
Yeah.
They were so
So
kind.
if you guys ever find it hard to find a place in Mumbai that's
Go to
affordable,
Oberoi.
just go to the Oberoi.
And they were also so nice. Oberoi has an extensive collection of art that they own themselves. So they made their art collection available to me to pick and choose and say you can hang them in your apartment, and when you leave you can take it back. So I had access to all the art. So it was very interesting. But I don't know what we were talking about.
No, I love it because one thing that really struck to me was when Daman was born. Was it Daman?
Yeah, yes.
And in the hospital address, I think you wrote Oberoi, and they were like shocked. Are you sure your address is Oberoi?
We needed to fill in a birth certificate form to apply for a passport, and then you need to, it says permanent address. It specifically says permanent address. So I had only one permanent address, that was the Oberoi. I put that in there, and they wouldn't accept it. Neither would the nurse, nor would the municipal corporation there. So eventually we had to get and a utility bill. I had no electricity bill because it's from the hotel, no water bill. So eventually the manager of the hotel had to write to the municipal corporation, to the hospital, saying it's okay. I mean, he does live there.
Yeah, absolutely. But the Mumbai era is kind of the period of life in Ravi's life where he was, running 3 businesses at once. You're really deep in your early entrepreneurial journey. But then, you step back from all of that. You left Mumbai. You shut down almost 3 active businesses. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what pushed that decision and the phase that you went into after that?
So it was very interesting. In fact, I was extremely fortunate that while I was in Mumbai, not only were we building businesses in 3 completely different fields, but they were also at different stages of growth. They needed different set of thinking and inputs, etc. So it was a very interesting and I would say a very active phase of my life then. And while in the middle of that, I was also training for a marathon. I was trying to do all sorts of things there. But I realized that while I had, as Cathy said, I looked at entrepreneurship or business as an art form in itself. You find some opportunity that you see, and then you try to think of a solution for it, and then you go and execute that. And how elegantly you can execute it, how elegantly the solution that you can identify. So those were things that really motivated me. But after a while, I did have a health scare in the middle in 2004 or so. Then it gave me a few days of pause. It was forced pause, but it made me to think a little bit and reflect about the inertia in my life. I mean, I was doing wonderful things. I couldn't really complain. I had a wonderful life. I was living in a great place. There were multiple businesses. We were the first, I think we were one of the first private equity backed businesses in India, period. We raised over $27 million for this payphone business in '99. So that was a long time ago. So we were doing reasonably well. But I think that that pause allowed me to think a little bit more about, am I really creating value? I mean, all of these things are interesting, but I still look at them with me at the center. I mean, they're interesting to me, and they do solve a problem in society, but I couldn't find any real connection to a broader society or something that I should have felt proud about. I mean, when you sit a pause and you look back and you say, what are the 10 things that I can remember that I really feel happy about or proud about? And I realized that out of those 10 that I listed, there was only one business-related item in that, or maybe two at most. And all the other things were other parts of my life where I was involved in with my family or society, or even small things. And I realized that it makes no sense. I'm spending 90% of my time on something that does not even count for 10% of the things that if I look back on and say that these are things that I really should have done. So it was an opportunity to, I mean, I said there were two ways I could have gone from there. One is to sort of repair the car while it's in motion. You can tinker a little bit with it. But I thought the best way, if I really thought that this was such an important break, was to actually stop everything and then rethink on how to get back. I mean, is this the right business? Should I be involved in business? If I do, how should it be designed? And how should I be involved with my family, with my society? Where should I live? All of those questions, which I assumed were answered or were taken for granted, or inertia, or the fact that they were good enough for me. In fact, they were great for me. But still didn't mean that they were right, or that was the right thing to do for the rest of my life. So I was lucky that not only things went well, but also that I had an opportunity to pause in a forced manner. And I think that I took a break for a few years at that time. And I think that was the time that made me reflect a lot more and reconsider the inputs that go into building a new business and a new life.
Yeah. So, I mean, before we go more into what you did after the pause, I want to come to Cathy.
Mm-hmm.
So, a poet, Columbia University, what are you doing in India?
What am I doing?
Exactly. What are you doing?
That's
in
a good
India?
question. I mean, I came to India because when Ravi approached me, it was mainly conversational. We were talking about the trust, we were working together on a plan for it. And when I came to India, I saw that it's just such a diverse and interesting place, right? I think it's at that point in history where countries go through, where there's a lot of growth, a lot of aspiration. It has one of the largest youth populations in the world. And when I look outside, there's a lot of things to fix. There's a lot of opportunities to really make a difference. So I came to India, and I was doing some research for the book, and that gave me a great view into India. We visited Hyderabad, Mumbai, Delhi, different places that were parts of Ravi's life, and I saw it from Ravi's perspective. But I also met people from all walks of life who had really built a life here in India. It was my first interaction with it. And sometimes you just fall in love with places. I fell in love with eating dal and rice every day. I fell in love with, riding the auto to work. And so I doubled down on India, and, now I live in Bangalore. The book's coming out, and I'm also trying to do some entrepreneurial things of my own, something that I never thought I would ever attempt in my lifetime, nor did my parents, nor did my friends. But I think that, sometimes finding those places that really speak to you is important. So, yeah.
Wow, awesome. A poet and entrepreneur. Coming
And
back
writer.
To, and a writer, and unstoppable at that. That's the
my
first
goodness.
quality. You meet Cathy, you can feel that bubbling energy coming from her, and she's totally cool. I want to ask Ravi about the pause period, because I think you took a 5-year long pause.
Right.
For someone who had such an immensely successful.
And I say pause from commercial business. I
Yeah.
was still living life, but yeah, I was not an active business in that period.
Yeah. So, do you want to tell more about like what that pause really meant to you, what it did to you, and if that pause never happened, would you be the same person who you are right now?
I'm glad the pause happened. In fact, that's one of the reasons why, in fact, Cathy also suggested that we share this story, because it happened in my case that the pause was forced. It was not my choice or at least that I had a break to think about life. Most people continue life through inertia, and if things are going well, there is really no reason to reflect or look back. So I think that it took me many years to even think about what am I pausing for, whether there is an end to the pause, whether there's something else that I can come out with. But I surrounded myself with great friends, with wonderful people. I traveled the world. I lived in different places, and also I had taken up vipassana a little bit, meditation, when I was training for my first marathon. I was unable to complete. I was running into this wall. After 20 miles, I just couldn't finish. So my running coach told me, why don't you try to meditate? Because your body is capable of running, but your mind is stopping you from completing. So I went with a very transactional view the first time I went to the person, saying, I'm here, I need to fix so that I can run my 26 miles. I went there, and it was transformational for me, but it was still narrow in scope for what I was looking for. I came back, I did run the marathon. But as part of the pause also, as part of reflecting also, I came back and I did a proper course, a full course, after having reflected a little bit. And I think that was probably the most transformational moment for me. Not only to determine what I want to do, but how I want to do, how I want to design my life. It didn't give me answers about details about whether it will succeed or what are the steps to take, but it gave me a clear path in my mind, or at least I had more insight about what I really want to do. And if I didn't want to do that, I really didn't want to enter a business or do something. I mean, I was lucky in a way that I did have the resources at that time to be able to step back and say, let me wait until I find something that really resonates with me. But I think it was important to take that break, and I don't think I could have ever even contemplated trying to be involved and try to build something like Mitra, something like we have now. I don't think I can't see any way that those dots would have connected to doing the kinds of things we're doing now. I mean, of course, we're in a very competitive business. It is hard. I mean, we constantly face crises from various sides, but it has still been a far more fulfilling and far more interesting a journey. And I've met a lot more interesting people in this phase of my life, I must say.
Yeah, so one thing common to all three of us here is we all have done Vipassana.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that people who do Vipassana, it's on one hand, it's just the impact on your mind, the clarity of mind you have, the peace of mind. But I think for people who are at a certain stage in life and looking for answers, it also really transforms the way that you look at yourself. One thing that we write about a lot in the book is decentering the ego, right? How do we take ourselves out of the ways that we feel and react to situations, to struggles, to daily stimulus? Because at the end of the day, we're all very attached to ourselves. We want things, we're scared of things, we have an identity, I'm a writer and that means XYZ. And I think that one thing Vipassana really does is it dissolves all those categories. Everything can change, everything is impermanent. And the way to really go through life is to attach yourself to something that's more collective, whether that's humanity or your family or the broader family of the world, right? As opposed to focusing so much on this idea of a stable and eternal self. So, that's something after hearing Ravi's story, I was like, I gotta go do this. And I remember once I got out of Vipassana, a lot of people said that the way that, I was acting in situations and making decisions was very different. And I think that I hope that a lot of people go on that journey. It's incredible.
Yeah, so there's one thing about something you already mentioned in the book. When you came out of the Vipassana, the thing you did. So I mentioned that to my girlfriend, and she said, "Oh, that's so romantic." The very first thing that he did. I mean, he comes across this shy, shy entrepreneur, but he does have a romantic side to him.
We're talking about business. No, it was. I mean, it's when we go through something so deep, like a question of course, and when you're going through a life reflection period on life, you think not just about business or your children or your parents, but you also think about how you want to live the rest of your life, who you want to live with. And yeah, I did meet Helen just a few months before that when we were hiking on Kilimanjaro, and it was an opportunity for me to think a lot about it. I think we pretty much designed a life around many of these things, many of the ideas that we had. It's very funny. It almost feels surreal because most times life sets a lot of things in course. I mean, you don't have many choices, but we were very lucky that we were able to design our life saying this is what we want to do. This is the kind of people we want to do it with. This is the kind of business we want to build. And these are the kind of things we don't want to do. This is where we want to live. Or any number of those things. It was very unique for me to think that you can even design a life. I know we design companies or we design some activities, but I think that it was radical for me to believe that we could actually design a life. And we said that if we can design a life around people, we put the most important things in our life in the first circle, and then you build everything around it.
Yeah, which is I think the first thing I did after reading the book was call up my family, because the conviction with which you wrote, you completely shifted your life.
Right.
It became more about society, family, and then yourself. And I think that's a key takeaway from the book if anyone wants to read that. I want to get into one more thing about Mitra. So, at what point during this pause and during this Vipassana did the idea of forming this company, entrepreneurial company, because from what I read, you have no prior background about energy sector whatsoever.
Yeah. No prior background about any sector.
Any sector, okay.
We didn't come across renewables cold. I mean, we were trying to set some guidelines for the kind of business we want to build, and we set some first principles. The first was we want to build something that has longevity, maybe over decades, over generations. The second, we said that it must have scale. If you want to create impact, it must have scale. And in India, scale is in billions. I mean, there's so much yet to be built. And the next was, we said that we must have governance and we must have the ability to run these businesses professionally, with competitive but professionally. So we were trying to find businesses that fit into this paradigm. And like airports and ports and roads, other infrastructure was being built in India. But we felt that there was no real way for us to enter it, because we still had the same scrappy approach. We were still trying to create equity value and to build large professional companies through a similar tangential approach that we had used in earlier parts of earlier businesses. So the renewable business at that time in 2009 was going through a transition, or what I thought was it was going to go through a transition very soon. And we were, I would say, lucky that we were proven right very quickly. So, I was thinking, I was not thinking about power. I was just thinking about the infrastructure business in India. I went on a hike with one of my very good friends in Iceland. We hiked over almost 5 days of a glacial sheet, with no GPS, nothing. We literally walking with 40-pound backpacks on our back. And at the end of the hike, or at the end of this glacier, we dropped down from it. And this steaming pool of water. It was the first time I'd seen anything like that. My friend was Icelandic. This is normal. This is everywhere. Come on, and he took his clothes off and he said, "Let's jump in." I thought it was crazy. It was so cold. I could not imagine that water is actually so warm. So we stepped into it. We cleaned up a little bit, and I asked him a little bit about geothermal energy. And luckily, his father, a lot of his family were involved in the design and part in building these businesses. So I did take a tour, and I was really inspired, saying that this is such a clean source of energy. There's a 90% plant load factor. It's extremely friendly to the environment. It's just hot water coming up from the earth, and then you run a turbine, and then you pump the water back inside, or you just use the water. So, and India had a potential. It still has a potential over 10 gigawatts of geothermal. So I went around. I went to the offices in Delhi, in Bombay. I went around all these hot springs. I realized in India, where all these hot springs, temples came around all these hot springs. So these are, I was looking, I was trying to find these geothermal pools, and then I realized there's a correlation here. There's a temple next to each of these. So anyway, and all the research that had happened in geothermal was somebody is trying to mine for coal, or somebody is trying to mine for oil, and they hit one of these aquifers of water, and then they abandon it and go away. So we had all these little data points from around, but we realized that while it fit with the other objectives, but one, we couldn't scale it, and it was still far away. Even today, after 10 years, it's still been very hard to actually get any geothermal going in India. So then we recognized that wind energy in India was a very interesting way to approach this problem, because at that time India already was the fourth or fifth largest country where we were a source of energy using wind, and we said, okay, maybe we can use an existing industry, and we can redesign how this faces investors, how this faces SEBs, how all the stakeholders. Can we put these pieces together in a different way that can make it profitable? Because until then, although India had 10 gigawatts by 2009 and 2010, it was an unprofitable industry. Lenders were unwilling to lend. There was no loans given on a non-recourse basis, which is just on the basis of that. You always need a parent balance sheet to support it. So we said that maybe there's an opportunity that as the thermal business is going, it was at the beginning of the start of its decline that we see today. It was a very early stage in 2009. We said that this is a trend that is going to continue over the next few decades. So we picked wind energy, and we said that also, how do we differentiate ourselves in the wind energy business also? Because if you're how do you create equity in that business? So we ended up doing not just selling power using turbines, but doing almost the whole soup to nuts, right from designing farms to actually building them, to do EPC, to determine where the farms are. So we came up with a very different model.
So it was ultimately, one of the first probably startup utility companies in the world. Because
Yes.
you think about utility companies, and there's usually a huge, older organization or conglomerate. So Ravi again took his tangential solution towards that. But I think, for me, the most interesting part about Mytrah is the way that it was designed with this kind of, social initiative and this idea of not pushing the individual at the forefront of it. Because we read so much these days, and individual entrepreneurs are so revered, the Elon Musks of the world, the Steve Jobs of the world. And I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of things to admire about those individuals, but there's so much that gets lost in terms of who actually creates value in a business like that, and who deserves, the rewards from that business. So I would love, maybe Ravi, you can tell us a little bit about, I know that you spent a lot of time before setting up Mytrah, you spent a lot of time on the business side, obviously, but you also spent a lot of time on designing this corporate structure side. Even during the book, we did a lot of research, and I think Santosh knows about the process. I got together even 3 or 4 people who were, serious academic researchers in various areas, whether that's, social governance, people who would research history, theology, philosophy, economics, yeah. And one thing I like about Ravi is, this guy reads and researches a lot. So we talked about, Japanese companies, we talked about the Swedish model, so maybe you can give us a little insight into how you made those decisions, how you met John Riches and put this all into motion.
So even while we were setting Mytrah up, because we approached it with this principle in mind, but we recognized it would be very difficult to explain this to investors in the first round. So we set the company up as a traditional business where I owned the stock of the company and we had outside investors. But the moment the company got going, and once Vikram became the CEO and he led the management team within almost maybe 10 months of getting started. So I went through the process of trying to put together this structure, this multi-level, multi-tiered structure of ownership. So we have a trust in Jersey, which is in the Channel Islands near the UK, that owned the shares in Mitra. So we created a layer where the beneficial ownership or the beneficial rewards of this business will be split into two parts. And the largest would be 90% of that, over 90% actually, will go to this public charitable trust called Prawaha, and about up to 10% of that will be used for our family needs, etc. And then this 90-10 came from whenever I spoke to entrepreneurs or I spoke to lawyers, I always heard that most people leave up to 10% to charitable causes, and 90% is used for them. I thought it's a good way to flip it around. And he said up to 10%. We probably won't need much of it, hopefully. So we designed it, and we designed it in a way that it exists right at the beginning. It's built into the DNA of the company. It is set irrevocably. And today, while we have control and ability to operate the company, but we are operating or we are taking the shareholder decisions on the basis of this very large shareholder, who is this trust, that trust creates that person in the room at the table who says that, are you doing this for my interest? I mean, how are the decisions that you're making? How are the commercial decisions you're making? How are they going to translate to a benefit to me as this charitable trust?
Yeah, so I love that there's a conversation in the book between Ravi and his trust lawyer. And he's a really sophisticated guy, like this guy has designed trusts for, for royal families, for some of the oldest families in Europe, from the guys that make the Heinz bottles, everything.
Founders of Fortune 500
Exactly. So Ravi is just going in there and being like, I want to set up this trust. And the guy's like, where's your business? He's like, I started about 10 months ago. And he's like, okay. And then Ravi's like, yeah, I want to do this 90-10 division. The guy's like, 10% charity, right? He's like, no, 10% myself, 90% charity. And this, you can just see in the line of discussion, this trust lawyer, he's really baffled. He's like, this is quite radical, quite a deviation from what he's seen before. And, I've met him in person, like such a knowledgeable person, really, really stately guy. And I think one thing is he put a lot of thinking into how to do this in a way that's high governance, how to do this in a way that's sustainable across generations. Because this isn't just a decision for Ravi, this is a decision for his family, for future generations, everything, right? And we are in a country right now, India. I did not have any context on India before this, but when I came here, I really saw, this is a country where more than 65% of the businesses are family owned, where, family business is such a core model to the economy. And I think that, this is a radical interpretation of that, but it's equally as important because, the family really, one thing that I really admire having interviewed and interacted with Ravi's family is that, all of us get together on the core things, being there for each other, doing social good, doing something meaningful with our time, building, successful ventures that provide for other people. But I think, in fact, these things brought everyone closer, because you're working for a greater purpose. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, the other thing I noticed in the book was it's like 3 books in one. It's your story.
Yeah.
It's a small book.
It's small. It's not very long, guys. Don't worry.
It's still 3 books in one. And why I see that is, it obviously covers Ravi's story. I think the major key points in your life what defined who you became. You have covered all of them, and I love that you've covered them honestly. The second thing is the philosophy, and the third thing, which really I thought was very exciting, and I had never heard an idea like that. You want to talk about the Build India Foundation, which you mentioned in the book, the vision for it,
absolutely.
And how will you? Because at the outset, it sounds crazy. The idea is, oh my God, how is it going to happen? So how are you going to make that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that, Santosh. So, I think one of the book is right now called Myth of the Entrepreneur, right? But one of the working titles we had for the book was Grain of Sand, actually. And the reason why that was whether it's through Vipassana or whether it's if you look at Ravi's role at Mytrah today, he always talks about himself as a grain of sand, someone that kind of sets the seeds, a grain of sand like in an oyster, but then when the pearl is created from that grain of sand, its origins are invisible. You don't see the grain of sand anymore. It's just transformed into something else. And I think that if we look at this, Vipassana is about decentering the ego. Ravi's role at Mytrah is about empowering, management and new leaders to come up and make a lot of decisions. But in terms of the New India Foundation, when we came up with this and really thought about this, it was about, first of all, diagnosing an issue, obviously. A couple of things we see in India is that there's a huge development shortfall in India, right? And it's in the trillions of dollars required in order to just provide basic education, sanitation, basic needs and welfare to a huge population of people. And also the second thing is a lot of wealth is being created in India in the next 10 years. It's going through that period of growth. So the question that we really face is how are we going to channel that wealth into where it is required the most, where it's providing those basic development needs that are so scaled and so impossible to tackle. And one of the things we see in any of these, trust structures is that a lot of things become still quite private. Private foundations are run by their founders, the initiatives, and there's a huge issue of fragmentation across the entire NGO space in India, right? Like India has the most NGO per square foot in the entire world. But if you look at the amount of things that are still not done, there's clearly more work to be done, right? So we realized that, this isn't just about our story or about Mitra or about Ravi. What we really want to do is how can we get a bunch of people, a bunch of this wealth that's going to be created in the next decade, channeled into an organization that can tackle some of these issues at scale, and that requires standardization and scale, right? You don't want, one health initiative here, it's done in 10 villages, and then some other thing is being piloted here. Like, that's not a way to create those massive solutions. So when we did actually a very thorough study of foundations, charitable giving across the world, and one thing we thought about is like, look, why don't we become a grain of sand even with the wealth that Mytrah creates? Why don't we, create with a bunch of other people, not with us at the center or anything, but with a bunch of other people from different walks of life, a foundation which is raising money from different sources of society. It might be corporate CSR budgets, it might be individuals like Ravi, it might be just, the Indian diaspora. It could just be the middle class. One thing we found in our research is that actually lower socioeconomic units are more predisposed to giving in India than higher buckets of income, because when you're living that, you understand the importance of collectivity and sharing, and everyone's going to be down at some time, so let's create various safety nets for each other. So how can we, the ambition for something like the Build India Foundation is, can we seed Build India with $1 billion or a significant amount of capital, and can we use that to then raise $100 billion to really face some of those core issues in India? And that's a 20-year plan, but I think that we've gotten started. We have, I think, great people in India who also very much have their hearts on that cause, and we can't wait. That's the thing, is that a lot of people, it's like we could wait till the end of our lives, we can wait to do all of these things, but I think that India needs to see some of this change today, and we need to set a lot of that in motion today. The urgency is clear. There's such a vibrant youth population in India who just need some support and some basic things to make their dreams come true too. So we want to get moving.
Wow, I've got goosebumps right now.
Oh my gosh.
I'm sure like a lot of people who are listening to this also may completely align with the vision.
Mm.
But how do they contribute to your vision? Is there some way they can connect with you? Is there some way they can pitch ideas? How this can happen?
Absolutely. We want to evolve a lot. This book is just a way for, I think, us to put a stake in the ground, say that we're really serious about this vision, serious about making a change. So if you go to www.searchfortruevalue.com, we have an email address that you can contact there, and we'd love for people to get involved. Prabha, the foundation, which essentially is a major shareholder in Mytrah, is already pioneering education, sports, as well as agri-tech innovations in India today. And we love always to get like-minded people, young people, partner organizations to be involved. Build India, like I said, that's a 20-year plan. And anyone who really has the heart to do it with us, it's more than an open door. I think one thing maybe is we can also take some questions from the audience. If
I may
has.
add,
Yeah.
Build India is 20 years if we go at our pace. But
Yeah.
Build India can happen in 2 years. I mean, if we don't have to wait. I think one of the key reasons why I pushed myself into moving from being completely under the radar to being public about advocacy or about this is to say that it shouldn't rely on my ability to create wealth, my ability, maybe we'll put $1 billion, maybe this is, after all, we're in a business. But the idea is much greater. I mean, even if we are able to create this wealth and seed that, or it is open for anybody too. The idea is that as long as you build a foundation, or as long as you're creating commitment of putting your resources in, it should not be limited by just what you can do, or what a small community can do. But as Cathy said, India has so much wealth. I mean, what is 100 billion? I mean, if you say that, if even somebody like me 10 years ago, we just started with almost nothing. And if we think that in time, if we are lucky, we can put $1 billion, there's so many stories out there. And it's not necessarily billionaires who contribute. I mean, there is so much wealth in the middle class. And I mean, as a percentage of income that people give to those in their family, their community, the people who work with me, even the staff, even my driver contributes more as a percentage of income than I do, which to me shows that there is this natural feeling, or there is this natural tendency to think about the other, but there is no real place where they can. Like today, if somebody says that I've got 10,000 rupees or I've got 100,000 rupees, what do I give it to? You can give it to a temple next door, or some religious organization, which I'm told is the largest place of giving in India, which is the temple. It's a good thing. But also you create fragmented infrastructure there. But if you create an organization, just as you have these large high governance organizations in the commercial world, and even in education institutions, for example. But if you're able to create something where people have confidence that these people who are going to run this, it is not based on their name. It is, a Build India Foundation is not a Mitra Foundation, not a Prava Foundation, or a Ravi, or a Cathy, or a Santosh. It is meant for everyone. And whatever we do, all we are trying to do is seed the idea. And if you have capital, as much of it we want to contribute. But this is an idea that is open to everybody. I mean, I would say it's collaborative even today.
Yeah. So coming back to the book, so books always have a way of defining who we become. For me, for example, the take home from this was the way you inverted the life and started working towards society, family, and then yourself. I have a question for you both. First, Cathy, what is that one book that you would recommend which had a major impact on your life, and what you got from it? And the same question for you as well.
Wow, that's a toughie, because I've been writing almost my entire life and reading
And
for
she reads a
probably
book a
longer
day.
than I write. So Ravi, can you take this first?
Sure. I did, a lot of books did influence me. But the book, in fact, I mentioned one book in this that even as a young person, I was very keen. I read R.M. Lala's Creation of Wealth, which was a story about the cartels. That genuinely inspired me. That in the 19th century, you're building a business that is going further and over and beyond what is required by law in understanding what a society means. And they created this trust structure in the early part of the last century, where they said that the very purpose of an enterprise in this world is to serve society. It's not the other way around. So that was inspiring to me, and I realized that it is possible for everyone. And to me, when you say that, I say society, family, me first, but I got everything I wanted. I mean, in the sense that it doesn't take, I don't think it's a zero-sum game where you're taking something away from you. I think that that was one of the books that inspired me to think that way. I mean, I have everything I want now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we write about that quite a bit in the book. So I think that the book I'll choose is when I was in my teens, I read this poetry book. So before this book is my first long form kind of prose work, but I was writing a lot of poetry. And in particular, I remember this volume by this Russian poet named Adrienne Rich, and I recommend any of her volumes. She has a collected one that I think is just called 1975, and it has all her poems post 1975. And there's a lot of themes that resonated there with me. I think the first is like this concept of exile. I was an immigrant. Even right now, I'm on an adventure in India, a completely new geography, where outside of when I first showed up here, I knew very few people. And I think I lived a life where whether it's art or being creative, it's always good to be an outsider. It's tough. It's not easy. It's always comfortable to be somewhere where you're an insider. But I think that there's something very special about being, in a quote unquote exile or having fewer roots and really being an outsider to a place where you can look at it with a fresh perspective. and I've had really fun time doing that with India. And I think also she writes a lot about the power of women, which I think is something that's really close to my heart, and also even close to Ravi. And a lot of the initiatives that Mytrah is doing, we try to focus on girls in society, underprivileged females, underprivileged girls, because, and this is something I talk to people all the time. If you look at some place like China, it's 80% female participation in labor. And that's one of the secrets to why it was able to grow so quickly and create so much wealth, because everyone is an equal and productive member of society. In India, even I live in Bangalore, even in a city like Bangalore, which is quite cosmopolitan, it's less than 40. Sometimes some of the census say it's less than 35, right? And there are obviously historical and cultural reasons for this, but I think that that's something that we need to encourage, that type of equality and participation to really have a flourishing society.
Now you can understand why I wanted to work with Cathy on this book. It is non-traditional in the sense that, because while I had a story and I had some ideas to share, but I thought that it made sense only if you combine it with a voice who is looking at not only differently but in the future. I mean, I have some reflections and I have some ideas on design, on how we put ourselves together. But I think it was important to also not just include the voice, but actually have it as strong a voice to say to have this conversation virtually in the book.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm okay. So firstly, the book, the link, where shall they find the link?
www.searchfortruevalue.com.
Yeah. So I had a really great time talking to you, Cathy, and
Thank
Ravi.
you.
I know it's a first in front of a webcam. Is this your first time?
It is.
It's my first time too.
We got both camera shy boys here, so you guys are lucky. This might not happen again for a while.
Yeah. And if you still have any questions, do check out searchfortruevalue.com. Drop in your queries at the email ID, or just comment here, and I'm sure Cathy or Ravi will pick up the questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you, Santosh. This was great fun.